Welcome back to Focus Matters. Today, I have a very special guest. We're going to have a slightly different interview than is often the case on this show. I'm joined by Will Misselbrook, and I'm going to introduce Will, but I'm going to allow him to introduce himself afterwards because when I look at his background and I look at what he's done, suffice to say the words brand, marketing, um, entertainment, branding. Did I say branding already? And creative surface over and over again. And Will's held really interesting and very important roles, both in the world of sports with the LA Galaxy as well with the Washington Commanders. But his background extends deeply into media, both working for the Wall Street Journal, as well as Condé Nast, as well as some fashion brands. So while in this series, we often talk about the science of focus and the science of attention, and we'll sometimes talk about brain health and how do we improve our brain health and improve our ability to focus and to channel our attention over time. I think it's fascinating to bring people in who have a slightly different perspective, who are people who professionally are cultivating attention. How are they grabbing our attention? How do they hold our attention? Because it's such a precious commodity that when we share our attention with a person or an organization, it's worth taking a moment to really understand that dynamic. So, Will, great to have you on the show. Give us a little bit of background. I know I touched some of the highlights, but give us a little bit of background on yourself, and then we're going to just jump right in.
Well, I think you did an amazing job. You should become my publicist. Or, I'm kidding. Thank you so much for having me on. It's an honor to be on your show and be able to chat with you today. And hopefully I can share some insights into my background and also how it applies to the attention economy. Yeah, so I'm Will Misselbrook. I'm a Brit. Been in America about 16 years, but my career started off in the agency space, creative agency space for just over a decade. And I transitioned into the media world with Condé Nast and actually went brand side at Coach for a few years. And then Wall Street Journal, and thankfully, or just it sort of strangely ended up in sports with the NFL at the Washington Commanders, and more recently over the last 3 years was at LA Galaxy AEGs. Yeah, and I joined into the NFL as a chief creative, and I think my first job title was chief creative officer and chief content officer. I held dual roles, kind of transitioned the second one over time to brand and marketing. But yeah, chief creative officer was my is the title that stuck, and that title as well took me to MLS as the chief brand officer and chief creative officer for LA Galaxy. New roles within these industries was really surprised me, and I always sort of began to think I was like, maybe this new title exists because the problem has changed within sports and entertainment. I don't think sports necessarily suffers from the lack of awareness. They suffer from the relevance component, and I think that was really interesting
Interesting.
to me. It's like I joined that world as fans already know like the teams exist, and the challenge is earning the attention and the cultural relevance, and then finding that emotional connection is the environment where loyalty is no longer guaranteed, and so a lot of my role position coming in
Wait,
to
wait. Loyalty is no longer guaranteed in today's
no longer
attention
guaranteed.
economy? You're joking.
I mean, yeah, mine in particular. Yeah, I think mine is definitely part of that as well. So yeah, I think when I was fortunate to join the Washington Commanders, and when I was meeting with ownership and having this conversation, and almost the progressive thinking from their side would allowed us to start to explore this role instead of the traditional CMO, who are can be primarily focused on the media efficiency or ticket sales and the campaign execution. The role was focused really to upstream a lot of that on the brand, meaning the cultural relevance and the emotional entertainment, because ultimately, like if a brand, isn't connecting, and then if the brand doesn't matter, the marketing doesn't work. So I think that's where, again, I was fortunate to be able to position myself to ownership in the NFL, the Washington Commanders, which was then the Washington football team, and be able to sort of look at it from a different economy. And that's what my role was and became part of that. And as this led me to the MLS where I am now, where I was.
You said a couple things there that I think are worth pausing on and coming back to. You said something about if the brand isn't relevant, that you can't earn the attention. Let's talk about brand. What is a brand? I think it's a word that is used generously. I have been in business long enough. There was a time to see sort of the evolution of the term brand. There was a time when you could be a product, and then it became, oh, a product is just a product. You need to be a brand. What is the difference between a company that is simply functioning as a company and a company that has a true brand essence?
It's a good question. I mean, I should know this because being chief brand officer, but obviously a lot of brands differ
That's why I'm
with
asking you.
the product. I mean, it's very hard because it's a broad question, but I love it. Brand earns relevance in people's lives, right? It goes beyond the product. It goes beyond the scoreboard. If it's a team, uh, it, it it has cultural relevance and can actually shape and shift people's perspective on outlook. I always reference Nike a lot. I mean, who wouldn't? They're not selling sneakers. They never started off just cold calling people and doing ads just to sell a sneaker. They wanted to become a full lifestyle brand that actually had impact and meaning into people. And the whole, just do it is effectively empowering people to go beyond their remit effectively and achieve greatness. So a brand to me is something that can shift culture and have relevance and have impact into your life versus just something that you wear or own in your household.
So I think that feels very accurate to me. And so if we look at this through this filter of focus and attention, it feels like when you align with a brand, and I think you said this, so I'm repeating what you already said, so I have nothing original to say. When you align with a brand, I am giving that brand permission to capture my attention. Versus if I'm just scrolling and I'm looking at a bunch of different things, my attention is moving sort of randomly, right? I'm looking for the shiny object. But brand also has the power of familiarity, which I think is something, the familiarity that then brings me to connection. So arguably, I think part of what you've done, and we'll talk at length about the Washington Commanders and the LA Galaxy, but happy to go further back, is shifting from, oh, it's a sports team to no, it's a brand I associate with. Therefore, as soon as I see that brand, I give it my attention because I have a relationship to it. Is that right?
Really, I mean, sports in particular is, and I think I've talked about this. People don't need to buy tickets to go to games. They are. It's not gas. It's not water. It's not necessity. They're doing it because of an emotional connection they have and an emotional feeling,
Hmm.
and that's what's driving them. And it could be good or bad. Teams, it is all it is such a fluctuating business to be in because the results on the field can hugely impact the business aspect and also
Mm,
people's
sure.
emotions. But that's part of sports. People go up the highs and the lows, and I think that's why people are so into it because it does have such a dramatic emotional roller coaster
Mm,
to every aspect of it. But so
emotional
and
range. Yeah, that's really
it's
interesting.
emotional
Yeah,
range, right? So
yeah.
then my job has been to, and I preach this a lot and tell my team, it's like we work in entertainment. First and foremost, sport is the foundation, but ultimately it is an entertainment industry we work in. So we're trying to create emotional entertainment, and that is through the digital to physical, in order to grab people's attention, but keep them engaged. And that's
Mm,
always the harder thing is attention, is collapsed and fragmented. Even if you look at the 90% of Gen Z fans nowadays are kind of watching sports, but at the same time they're on their phones, and it's kind of this two-way or secondary attention span that they have. So uh, I think fundamentally, as we operate as a brand, speed becomes a lot of your strategy, but volume has always been a temptation as well. But ultimately, creating volume is going to kill a brand. You have to create this
volume of
of
marketing signal.
marketing. Yeah, it's the allure, and you're trying to emotionally. People don't want to be overwhelmed with certain elements of a
Mm,
brand or a sport and everything else. You have to treat it with such delicacy and I think the mistake is always thinking the answer is more, but relevance, isn't won by creating or posting more content. It's earned by, saying or putting something out there that actually matters. And so a lot of my role has always
that's
been shifting that creative, the CMO position where you're looking at it through a media plan effectively, but the focus became not publishing unless it entertains or educates or moves an audience, requiring, and so that required a lot of discipline to focus on fewer, better ideas rooted in the emotion, culture, and audience insight.
that's interesting because what you're basically saying is that the human algorithm and the social media algorithm aren't that different. You can just push out quantity and think the algorithm is going to care. The algorithm doesn't really care. The algorithm it really only cares if other people care. So you push content out, like LinkedIn is the format I use a lot. And we know
Me too.
that when you push
Yeah.
onto LinkedIn, if you don't get engagement, it can be fantastic content. But if you don't get engagement in the content, the algorithm doesn't lift the distribution. It's basically the same with human beings,
Mhm.
because none of us, I don't think anybody finishes the day and says, "Oh, I didn't get exposed to enough things today." Right? I didn't have enough stimulus in my visual system today. It's quite the opposite. So that's an interesting shift to quality over quantity, but quality as it again relates back to this sense of belonging, the sense of feeling, this emotional content.
Yeah, I love
I,
what you just said. You know, I'm obsessed with LinkedIn as well. And no, let me ask you this: like, when you go to LinkedIn, you're not going there specifically for escapism, are you? You're going there to be informed or infotained in some way, but you're going there for
sure,
information. So you're
sure.
gonna your attention is actually a lot. I actually don't know the statistics or data on LinkedIn, but you would spend more time probably on LinkedIn because you're going there for a purpose and a reason that you're mentally engaged in that, and it's something you have to spend more time on versus Instagram, which is very, it's quick, it's escapism. You're flicking through, you're seeing fun stuff, but it is entertainment much in a much more raw sense. So you saying that actually is really interesting, and that's why I feel like a lot of brands sometimes fail, and yeah, making sure that you're being agnostic and purposeful on the brand and the audience you're speaking to with a lot of the content you're creating. And you know, I'm a big believer that you treat your brand as a cultural operator and not as an advertiser, in order
Mm,
to build that relevance. And through different platforms, then you can start to, especially within sports, you can start to expand into different categories and the collaboration sense. And that could be through music or fashion and the storytelling or community. And that's where you can start to find ways to distribute those on the platforms that will actually make sense to an audience and what their attention is going to be like on certain audience platforms. So yeah, I thought that was really interesting you said that, because I'm exactly the same. I'm obsessed with LinkedIn, but I'm going there knowing I'm probably going to spend a lot of time on here because I'm trying to gather information and my attention is going to be a little bit more focused than the escapist more platforms like a Facebook or Instagram.
I think that's right. I think we, yeah, we don't go on LinkedIn for a bunch of dopamine hits. Right, which is
Yeah.
in essence what we're searching for on Instagram and TikTok. It's a little bit of high, a little bit of low. People like me, I like people. You know, we know that whole dynamic. When we go to LinkedIn, we're either looking for information or we're looking for professional connection, which is fundamentally different. Um, you keep on coming back to a theme, and you told me something off camera that I want to revisit. Let's jump into the galaxy a little bit and that whole experiment. When you joined that organization, it was an opportunity to help to really revitalize a brand. Is that right?
Yes. And like, I'm not gonna critique my predecessors at all, but I felt, you know, having known LA Galaxy, and I'm a Brit, so soccer's been a huge part of my life growing up. Um, I I felt it would lost its way in the sense that it kept changing year to year. And uh, again, maybe this is me looking at it from a brand perspective, but it felt like it was just campaign led. And that's where when I started to and digging under the surface and speaking to a lot of the fan groups and even seeing a lot of the commentary out there, a lot of people didn't know what the brand stood for. And I agreed because it just changed every year, and it was treated
Sure.
as an advertising campaign and not as
Right.
a cultural entity. So when I joined, it felt dated, and I wanted to modernize it and give it a, it was clean it up. You know, we again, it was, went to the quality, not quantity, and focus so much on the details of the brand, from everything from the look and feel, but then also how we're positioning ourselves to the wider world, and what we, the content we were creating had to be different. And um, the way you can capture people's attention, oh, sorry, I was going to say is, instead of following the rule book and doing what every other team is doing in your space, or any, if you, whatever brand you work for, if you're just, you know, copy and paste what other brands are doing, then you're lost in noise. And so my whole philosophy when I joined was, we're not looking at any other team, we're not going to look at any past work. We're going to treat this as a cultural or an emotional entertainment brand, and we're going to start to do things that are taking huge risks, but educated risks, in order for us to break through noise, capture people's attention, and do things differently, because why not?
So we know yeah, scientifically that novelty is one of the ways you capture people's attention, right? And that's what you're speaking to is if it's all this team versus that team, this sport versus that sport, it's all a melange. But if suddenly you do something that's different, And it can work against you, as you say, it's a risk. You can do something really novel, get a lot of attention, but it's the wrong kind of attention. But you're getting the attention. So novelty. So when you set out and you were looking at the galaxy, what did you want the brand to represent? So what was your end goal when you thought, oh, we have crossed a milestone when I hear from fans that they say, this is what I think of when I think of the galaxy?
Um, yeah, well, I guess it was two-part. One was reestablishing the identity and what it meant to people, right? In fact, it has a legacy. It's one of the most storied, or probably the most storied club in MLS, and so it has a rich history. And a lot of that was not necessarily stripping that away, but it was finding a way to bring that and making it modern and true to today's form. But also then building a system that could live on. Effectively, a lot of when I first joined, the reason why I think it was kept changing a lot is because they actually hadn't spent the time to find the right toolkit and the brand playbook effectively that could last and actually had longevity, and find you can make amends and you can tweak things as you're progressing. But if you, again, I'm here to use Nike as another reference, but you really look at their brand, like nothing has really systematically changed in their in their history.
Yeah, the
um
core has stayed the same.
the core is always there, right? And I
Yeah.
don't think so. That was my big part of the role, was to try and unearth the core, but make it modern and relevant and cool and just interesting and different, and make
Hmm.
sure that it's completely rooted to the past. And then from there, we laid a foundation, and that's where you can start to expand on top of it. Because I don't, engagement to me isn't a volume game. It's the relevance game, and from there on, it was like relevance doesn't take a day off, and so we had to build a brand
Interesting.
that has it's building systems that operate year round. Creating content or creating anything that has reflects the cultural shifts and connects with an audience emotionally was a huge aspect of this, and trying to rethink or retrain the team I had to not think campaign led,
Hmm.
but think year round and year after year, like thinking 5 to 10 years down the road. And we had to also, in sports as well, is not treating everything has to be done regardless of the performance,
Mm.
because brands that win attention are the ones that earn the right to it through consistent cultural contribution. So, um, yeah, it was a lot of components and factors, but obviously grassroots was, or going back to the sort of the ground level and grassroots of everything, was to revisit and reignite the brand identity and give it a clean, fresh perspective that wasn't busy, and it kind of reflected everything the team and the organization had gone through, but something that set it up for success for the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay. Um, Along the way with your novelty experiments, you did a couple of very interesting things. I want to talk a little bit about bringing live music to events. So I've
Yeah,
been to the stadium. The stadium's impressive, but I think probably you saw an opportunity to provide more animation. Tell me more about that. And I think the last time we talked about this, you mentioned something about like soccer is not a tailgate experience in the United States, right? Football, people get there hours ahead of time. It has this
right.
massive cultural, social component. What were you hoping to bring to MLS, and how did it work out?
I'm curious actually first. Sorry, I'm going to ask you a question. So you've been to the
Yeah.
stadium. When was the last time? When was the one time before that you came? Like, have you been there like 5, 10 years ago, or is it
No, I've
any
I've actually only been once, and
only
it was
once? Okay,
empty. Yeah. So I went for a back of scenes tour. So I didn't actually get to see the team play there.
okay. Because
Yeah.
one thing I've also managed to do there was treating it as a canvas, just revamp the entire look for the whole stadium as well. So all the physical elements and the entire experience. But yes, let me back up a little bit. The NFL culture and having come from Commanders, like you almost don't have to do too much in order to entice people to come for the tailgating experience. That's just part of the tradition and the history, and it's awesome. Sure, you want to continue that experience once they step into the stadium itself, and make sure it's not they're getting in to watch a game, and you're not obviously trying to delay people from getting their drinks and going to the concessions, but also it has to be entertaining and an experience. It's very much like Disneyland. Not that I go to Disneyland very much, but it certainly is a point of reference because
Hmm.
uh, so that was my thought with the Galaxy experience, was I wanted to start 2 weeks before, go leading up to the game day. You're staying there, you're getting in early, because it's not just the like 90 minutes you're coming for, it is the entertainment, the experience that you're kind of traveling through this whole journey effectively. And then you're, at the end of the game, you're going home and then you're sharing a lot of the experience online afterwards. So, um, one, it was more of a risk or educated risk within this. It was sort of saying, okay, well, look, we live in LA, that it's a cultural hub of everything in music and film and TV. And I I began to sort of think about why not upping the entertainment aspect of the 90 minutes, and we stretched, if I could bring it forward by another 45 to an hour by building a music platform, which was a DJ, massive DJ stage, essentially with beautiful LED screens at the front. We had all this, the lights and packages around it as well to sort of give, give the stadium something different that they never had before, and actually no other MLS team had done. And I wanted it to become almost two parts. So you've got so much entertainment. The soccer is wrapped within the middle and sure the foundation, but people are going to be coming who aren't even fans of the sport, don't even know Galaxy, but they're going to come for a big music performer who's going to be performing for 20, 30 minutes before the game. They're going to do a halftime
Interesting.
performance.
Yeah.
And then, they're going to stay for the game because fine, they're going to continue to see their artist perform. But it changed the game in many ways as we started to see a huge growth in audience attendance of people who'd never been. And
Hmm,
then they stayed on and they became
hmm.
fans because we did these music performers week in, week out. And we called it Sounds of the Galaxy, which I came up with as this made sense of. There's so many things you can do with Galaxy in space. It's stupid, but
Sure.
um, I had a lot of fun with that. But what I also found was so interesting was the performers. We got some pretty interesting and big artists to come and perform. Their interest level of performing to an MLS audience grabbed their attention. It wasn't about the money for them. It was, wow, this is so entertaining and different for me. And the spotlight is growing on MLS, so that also helped. But then we're using their platform and their megaphone effectively to reach out to a whole new fan base, audience base, consumers who never even again heard of Galaxy, but they've heard of Alesso. And so then you're again bringing them down that funnel. And I know that's more of the traditional marketing speak, but I didn't go into this, and none of my team did, with KPIs, and we didn't have almost numbers to sort of say, okay, we're going to hit, I don't know, 10 million engagement, or at least performance on the content we're putting out onto our platforms. Didn't do any of that. It was like, let's do this and let's see and walk around and start to speak to people as like, was this entertaining? Does this get your attention? Would you come again? I just wanted to know how this made people feel. And it changed the feelings of people coming emotionally of like, this is something different that's never been done. I'm coming to be entertained. The sport, soccer is great. And sure, Galaxy had a terrible season this season, but yeah, people didn't care. Yeah, people would still come because they want to have a nice and fun day out. And when you're comparing it against NFL, you're never going to compete with that. But at least it's a step forward in in the right direction.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think we can arguably say really healthy from a brain perspective. So part of this is also this whole question of social gathering, of connectivity, of culture. And when we look at the research around long-term cognitive health and some of the experts that I get to talk to on this show, there's various different behaviors and there's various different conditions that we know will impact this. And one of them is isolation is going to hurt your cognitive health overall. COVID was a disaster on that front for everyone. And so I think people are craving connection. Interestingly enough, in this weird world that we live in, they're craving connection, but then there's also some fear associated with large groups. So I think it's interesting that music, music is that great bridge. Music is that way of bringing people in, lowering their defenses. If you can get people to smile, you probably have this giant mirror neuron soup where you have a lot of positivity flowing into a game that is now going to have a lot of emotional ups and downs. So I could see how
Yeah,
it's kind of
it,
building the tribe, isn't it?
it totally is. I mean, actually, the best criticism I get was um, people wanting their artists to perform. They're like, hey, I mean, I love Afrojack, but no, let's get, I don't know, Steve Aoki, people we couldn't even afford, but they would be, I don't know, that was the criticism was like, I want to get X person next. And I was like, well, this is a great problem to have because the demand has become,
Hmm.
bigger, I guess. And it's interesting to see. But you're absolutely right. Post COVID, even like maybe even before, but maybe less so because you're right. Experiences is what makes people feel and actually remember. I
Hmm.
can barely remember what I watched on TV last night, but you remember an experience and how it made you feel. And that's such an interesting component now to the world of brand versus the marketing, because I'm trying to think of that experience feeling versus what the numbers may look afterwards in, through my KPIs. And
Yeah.
story makes people care and emotion makes them stay. I'm a big believer in that. And it's a big difference between noise and a brand. And, the strategy from my perspective, and I think should be for a lot of brands, isn't necessarily to sell, is to connect, because the emotional entertainment or connection is what builds brands and not the transactions. Fans, consumers want to feel something real. And if you can bridge that gap between digital to physical, and it gets like 80% of people, fans, or whoever consumers stay loyal to brands that create that emotional connection.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, we're all craving tribe. I mean, I think there's no question
Totally.
about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
We're
Right. I
we've lost
completely
it.
agree.
We're all looking for our people. Um, so while we're on the galaxy, let's talk a little bit. I know that on my neurotrainer side, we've had a wonderful relationship with the galaxy for a couple of years. Michael Roboska does a great job running their cognitive performance program. I think you had an opportunity to experience neurotrainer and dig in a little bit. I'd love to hear a little bit about your personal experience, and then also what was your process, and now I think telling the story of how do you get people to understand this? Because you kind of brought it from behind the
Yeah.
scenes to the forefront, did you not?
We did, and I am for any of those listening out there, I'm a huge admirer of and fan of Noah and the technology you've created. It was fascinating to be a part of it, and I did a lot of this actually at Galaxy, as I'm very close with the trainers and coaches, was to try and immerse myself into a lot of the technology they're using for players. And I used to play soccer, but and seeing how advanced it's got, and what I what I found so fascinating about the the technology you've created with Neurotrainer was it's the reaction times almost, and not almost, it was. It's about how you're visually reacting and how quickly you can make a decision, or how it translates to your brain to make decisions. And um, in soccer, the best players are in the world are the players who have time. Time
Mm,
is everything, and that's because they're looking around them eh, all the time. They're literally creating space. They're trying to read the game 5, 10 moves ahead of everyone else.
hmm.
And your technology is being able to train your brain to almost think that way and do that. And that's I love it. And maybe I do have severe ADD anyway, but finding how I could then translate that into a story was it, on paper it wasn't hard, but visually it was hard, because you can't bring people to the experience. You have to try and tell it in a way that makes it less scientific. Because I mean, I'm not as nowhere near as intelligent as you are, so I had to simplify it in a way that I think a mass audience could be engaged. But
I'll
neuro,
hold that as a question mark, but
well, I
um,
suddenly just when I broke it down, it's like neurologically, emotion and attention are all inseparable, right?
yes.
It processes emotion, directly influences the brain, and which forms memories, meaning emotionally charged experiences are encoded more deeply and recalled more recently. Explains why fans will remember that feeling and how a brand made them feel. It was breaking it down in that sense to kind of try to connect the dots between the neuroscience to emotion and the attention, and bringing it to the live experience of how people are seeing and experiencing elements of the game, but also the players themselves, how I can watch them use your technology, and then literally I follow them on game day itself and mirror almost what they were experiencing on uh in the sessions with your technology. But then I literally be looking at their head movements and what they were doing with your technology, and it's like it actually is working, and how they're adapting to it and actually bringing it to their game.
Interesting. That's great. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, we look in our world, we look to create some invigoration. Emotion is important when it comes to neuroplasticity. The emotion that we actually look to play with is frustration. We have to actually stir the pot a bit in the frustration category. And anybody who's ever learned something new knows that
Yeah.
you don't pick up a new sport or suddenly play a musical instrument and just do it effortlessly. You go through a
No.
period of frustration, and as you're being frustrated, your brain and your body respond neurochemically in a way that makes you more susceptible or more receptive to learning, and that's part of the neuroplastic experience. So I'm glad you had an opportunity to experience that. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's hard
How,
to tell the story because the story takes place inside VR goggles. And so it's a
yeah.
double hidden, right? Yeah.
And you could pull the VR footage, and I've done a couple of VR series in the past, one with Lexus, but it doesn't have the same
It doesn't
translation
have the
because
same
it's
effect.
no, you can't. Visually, it just doesn't look as impressive. How do you think when you look at like a Ronaldo, Messi, and how I guess their cognitive response systems? Like, what are you looking at when you see their how they play the game versus someone who maybe
Well,
is not?
yeah, it's a great question. We'd love to get them in the headset. We'd love to
Yeah,
be able to see. We're in this. We're experiencing a really interesting year where we have more very high performers in the headset than in previous years across a broad spectrum. So we're dealing with very high performers in the military. This includes uh, combat pilots as well as tier one operators. We now have a few different. We're working with more professional sports teams than we have in the past, and so we're starting to piece together this puzzle a little bit to see, can we see, do soccer players have a different set of cognitive skills than, for instance, most recently we're looking at a data set from rugby players. And you
I
talk
check
about a
rugby.
sport that you wouldn't think is particularly cognitive. I don't mean anything negative about the sport. It's just a very physical sport.
Yeah,
And we looked at our data, and some of their most physical players whose job is really to move this mass of people back and forth it's interesting to see where they excel cognitively. And so it's not in things like visual tracking, which we see in soccer and with pilots. It's in their ability to stay focused for a longer period of time, their ability to
that's
sustain
yeah,
attention, and their ability to perform under pressure is kind of off the charts. So it's
yeah. I
fascinating
can't
to start to
imagine.
see the differences.
Yeah, pilots. It is a very that is probably the. How about Formula One as well? Have you looked at that? Because I guess it's the same that the attention you have to be so focused for such a long period of time that is so different from the reactive sport of like soccer or rugby, for example.
So for those who can't hear me smiling, Formula One, we've again, partly from an interest perspective, we've been so eager to work with Formula One drivers. We haven't done it yet, but we're getting very close. We're now we're one degree, going back to LinkedIn, we're one degree of separation from the people who train Formula One drivers, and I think we will see very similar skill sets and very similar capacities to probably air combat. Is probably the closest we're going to get.
Let's make it
I'll
happen,
let you know.
people. Yeah, out there.
Let's make it
Let's help
happen.
them. No, make it happen. Yeah, you'll get it. Yeah, rugby. I
So
actually played rugby growing up and broke my
I'm
cheekbone
not
in
surprised.
8 places and have a metal plate in my
Oh,
face. So
oh.
maybe my maybe my cognitive responses weren't as good as they should have been. But yeah. Anyway,
So let's spend a little bit more time in sport, and then we'll roll back. Actually, historically, we'll do this backwards because I am interested in talking a little bit more about how is all this different for like the Wall Street Journal. Right, to be able to be the head of
yeah.
creative for the Wall Street Journal and a similar job for the Washington Commanders. But let's spend a little bit of time in football. Were there any lessons that you learned during your time with the Commanders that really helped inform your work with the Galaxy as it relates to brand, fan attention, loyalty, etc.?
Yes. And I think this is maybe advice for anyone is you take your past experiences, learnings, you always package it up. And when you're going to a new complete, and I don't necessarily, I told myself early on, you would never take roles that you're 100% maybe qualified for, or is like a perfect fit because you're never going to be challenged.
Mm,
So
it's a great
when I
lesson.
joined, yeah, I'm a big believer in that because if you sort of go not sideways, wrong word, but if you're sort of staying within certain same industries, I just don't, you're not ever going to be growing mentally and challenging yourself or the people around you to think differently.
So
Um,
I'm not, I'm at the risk of breaking your train of thought here for just a
no,
moment.
please go.
Future episode, interview Tommy Wood, a PhD, MD, neuroscientist at the University of Washington, has a book coming out soon about this. Apparently,
Really?
yeah, I love what you said, because when we look at cognitive health over time, one of the transition stages where we see people really start to see a degradation in their overall cognitive performance is retirement. And
Hmm.
Tommy does this wonderful job of unpacking that retirement is really a social construct that is completely at odds with how the brain should work. And in the cultures where people don't retire, but they keep on contributing and they keep on pushing themselves and having really invigorated environments, and where we spend most of our time as a culture is our workplace, you see
Mm.
much higher levels of cognitive performance and cognitive health. So I love this idea of when you look for your next opportunity, don't look for something that's completely comfortable, because A, you're not going to learn anything, but B, you're actually doing your brain a disservice, because you
Totally
want
agree.
some challenge and disruption, because that's part of what really feeds our overall cognitive wellness. So sorry,
Yeah,
little
you said
plug.
no, you said it earlier, but we there's never a day you go to bed and be like, "Oh, I didn't get enough information today." And
Yeah,
but
right.
we are as humans, we are always wanting to learn more. Right? It's always we consume new information. It's just who we are, and obviously the world has made it more available to us. And when you're going to a new role, a position, and sure, there's you can see a connection somehow. You're not saying I'm going to become a rocket scientist because I actually know it could because I'm not as nowhere near as bright as I could be to do that, but you're going to a new space that you're learning. You're suddenly like, I'm learning, and this is a whole new space, world, terminologies, and people that my brain is continue to be challenged, and other people around you suddenly they're learning as well because of what you've come from and where your
Sure,
background is. And
sure.
it sort of invigorates everyone, inspires everyone to mentally just almost take a
Grow.
step forward but backward, yeah,
Yeah.
grow.
Well,
Um,
well, then
and
let me
yeah,
reframe the question, because then I have to be fair.
or the
You're
Wall
at
Street
the Wall
Journal.
Street Journal. Yeah, you're at the Wall Street Journal. You're the head of creative. Um, and then you decide, no, I'm done with this. I'm
I
going to
didn't in a way,
go.
but
Okay. So
I
so
really didn't
break it
know.
down. So at some point you transition and suddenly find yourself inexplicably, however the journey goes, to now you're at an NFL team. So let's understand that transition, and then what fundamental changes did you have to make, and maybe what were some of the challenges that you experienced? You're coming out of this one industry into another. Where did you have to grow in terms of your cognitive skills? So a
It
little
was a
bit of both.
huge learning curve for me in many ways. I wasn't thinking about moving into sports, love NFL. It was all very happy chance. Like just happened. I knew one of my very dear friends. It was the CFO and COO there, and he and I go way back, and we were just talking. And I thought he was just picking my brain about what they could do to become a media entertainment brand. And
Hmm.
I'll be completely honest. At the time, they were watching the football team, and I didn't know who that was. I know the Redskins, but I kind of missed that moment when they just transitioned. And so I was like, "Wait, do you work for a college football team?" And he was like, "No." I was like, "Oh shit, sorry." So then, yeah, as we started chat more, he sort of opened up that they were, and I spoke to ownership with Dan Snyder, and they wanted to bring me in, which really, and I love Dan Snyder, and he came from the media world, so he and I he understood the
Oh,
power of
interesting.
brand,
Okay.
what that meant for the team, and I think that was the direction that he was looking for us to expand upon. Yeah, a couple of conversations later, and they asked me to join, and it was I think I was looking at the time. I'd been at Wall Street for 3 years, and I just moved to Los Angeles. But I was like, this. I don't think I understood the grandeur of it at the time either. I don't think I just was really fascinated with the brand. I started just diving into the Redskins history, this transition to the Washington football team, and what it meant to society and how people emotionally were reacting to this.
Mm,
And then I unfortunately got given the task of doing the entire rebrand, but that the where I felt so much experience where I come from in Condé Nast or coming from brand side was the Wall Street Journal. I loved the most was the challenge was creating cross-platform content storytelling, and I wasn't on the newsroom side, but for a very distinct audience in quite a saturated space. And a lot of my goal was to deliver entertainment, infotainment, information that people generally wanted to engage in, versus stuff that would just get lost in the noise. So you're creating for content for people that they want to watch versus being forced to watch. Um, it's not advertising; it was tapping into the cultural relevance of what's happening at the time. And when you're working for a brand who's looking to sell per se, you're having to train them differently to sort of say the world doesn't need to be sold to anymore. They want to be like feel a part of something and be, if you're trying to sell your brand, connect it into some story that actually has relevance or meaning to other people. So having come from agency world to this media space now to the football, it was an easyish transition in so many ways because the creativity from agency world is so incredible, and you learn so much within that space to then the media side to now, yeah,
So
it
so
it
it's
felt
interesting because
natural.
when I think of the journal, and I grew up in New York, right, New York and New Jersey. When I think of the journal and I think of brand association, my mind goes to I carry it. Right. So yeah, I'll date myself here, right? Like you would see me carrying the Wall Street Journal. You would see me
Yeah, yeah, right.
reading,
Yeah,
I'm reading the journal on the train if I'm out Long Island, or if
yeah.
we flash forward to, my days in the Bay Area, you're on the ferry and you're reading the journal. It's not like you're wearing Wall Street Journal shirts or you're painting your face the color of the Wall Street Journal. It's an intellectual brand and
Well,
it's
yeah,
an
you're
intellectual
intelligent.
association.
You weren't carrying the New York Post. You were carrying the Wall Street Journal because you're an intelligent man.
Right.
But no, I'm kidding. Sorry,
But
carry on.
then NFL is a little bit more in your face in terms of how you bring that brand to life. So again, was it you said it was a big learning curve. What were some of the adjustments you had to make? And was there ever a time where you felt like, oh, I've actually stepped into shoes that are too big, or did you just feel like, no, I can make this adjustment?
I didn't feel it was too big. No, I think not coming from an NFL team really helped me in my approach suddenly because most of my team, a lot of people who are within sports have only ever worked in that world. They've kind of gone from team to team, and it's a very insular bubble. Once you're in, you're not really looking outside at the wider world and what's
Interesting.
grabbing people's attention. You're focused inwards, and that's it pained me almost so much to look at it because if you look at a lot of the NFL teams, and maybe I'm dating this is 6 years ago now, but everything looked the same. Every single
Mm,
piece of content, it's like the rule book had been laid and they had to follow the same algorithm for everything. Approaching the creative, the brand, the marketing aspects from a very different perspective helped me. And I did because I didn't necessarily care so much about what had happened in the past and what all the other teams were doing. I was trying to then shift my colleagues' thought process and their mindsets, educating them. And I spent a lot of time showcasing and showing and sharing a lot of work that's out there. But I'd also bring it back into the command as well, just to inspire people. And I think the shift to cultural relevance as well was something that was missing. And so again, just using a lot of the experience I had in order to find ways I could develop a whole new brand strategy for the team that had not been done before. So that really helped me, I guess, from my past was not being from that space. And my mindset was not clouded so much with the NFL. I was looking at this brand and being like, I love it, but now how can we alter this and make it more relevant, expand upon it, give or take the results. And obviously going through the name change was difficult, but uh, yeah, it really helped me develop that sort of understanding of how I can build this out.
You've said you've used the term cultural relevance for both the Commanders and for the Galaxy. So, what is cultural relevance for a sports brand in today's world? What does that mean?
Um, Sports is so ingrained in people's life. The emotion, the passion that people have towards the players and the team. These players are people. They're humans. They have other lives. They have stuff going on behind the scenes. And I think a lot of there is an end result to this. I'm going to give a point to this, but like a lot of
Hmm.
sports teams, it's 90 minutes. What's happening on the field? It could be the any game, any sport you're watching. But if you aren't finding a way to connect these players, and they are brands within themselves, to human or real life or cultural, and by cultural I mean other categories, and that is other things that people are interested in, or even if you're not interested in the sport, and showcasing them in a way that is more meaningful and has a connected tissue to who you are, then that's where you're dying as a sports team. And by that I mean, these guys love fashion, they love music, they love food, they love cars. Everyone has, I don't, maybe they don't, but people will tap into these categories and
The
oh,
universal interests.
right, anything. And what's trending right now, and that, I'm not saying you have to work with influencers or any of that stuff, but finding a way to bring these players into real world so they're not just these high level, top athletes on a field. They actually have lives, and you're kind of finding a way to find that connective tissue, and that goes to the brand itself. And so doing collaborations brand side with a big music entity or a fashion collaboration. We did a lot of those with
Mm.
up and coming trending brands, fashion brands, streetwear brands. It makes you relevant, but you're in a cultural space that means a lot more to other people who aren't necessarily fans of your world, if that makes sense. I
Yeah,
use
actually,
that
that
cultural
helped a
connection.
lot. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
we'll
by
use
bridging
fashion.
different categories.
Yeah, we'll
Go
use
on.
fashion as that link. So we know
Yeah.
that people are interested in fashion. We know that there's culturally relevant fashion. We have this mega sports team over here, but it's people who actually make up the team, right? Your loyalty isn't just to numbers and positions, it's to actual players and people. So now if we can link these two together and show here's Will and here's what he loves, the brands that he loves, or here's what he loves in fashion. Now, I, as a fan and consumer, can not only engage with the team, but now I
Mhm.
can go get the stuff that makes me feel closer to Will because now we're rocking the same jacket and now I'm
There you
part of the
go.
tribe.
That's exact. Yeah, because not everyone wants to walk around every day with a huge sports team logo across their chest, right? And so you have to take the not arrogance out of it, but you take the idea that all right, we want our sports logo. No, find a way to build your brand into a fashion collaboration that is trending right now, and that's how the
Yeah.
design looks, how the wording looks. And so we did so much of that. We actually created a lot of our own merchandise that didn't have all the big logo. It was just
Mm.
I use my wife actually a lot as a sounding board because she doesn't like sports, and so I would create. We did
Another
all the
thing our
merch.
wives have in common.
There you go. Hey, we're gonna be best friends on this. But I would come home after we've created a new merchandise line, fashion line that was our own, a couple of times, and she'd be like, "Can you get me a couple of those? I want the size extra small."
Ooh.
I'd be like, "Okay, awesome," because it was trending design. It was something different. It wasn't all the big logos, and
Mm.
that was the same with the collaborations we were starting to do. And I recommend this for a lot of brands. Is you don't have to just put your own stuff out, but attaching yourself in a way that's strategically right for you will grab people's
Hmm.
attention. You can't just do it because, hey, I want to collaborate with Kith or Supreme because they're who they are. Do
Hmm.
something that is connected to your community and what it
Hmm.
means to your brand. And that takes a minute to find the right partnership, but it takes you out into a whole different world, and suddenly you can start seeing people. It's back to the attention economy. Ambassadors will walk around, they'll go and buy merchandise that is not heavily Galaxy branded or what Washington Commanders branded, and they're becoming advocates for the brand because they like it and it's cool and they think it's something that they just want to wear.
And now the brand is touching another part of their lives.
Right.
Right,
Exactly.
because if I'm just wearing a Galaxy T-shirt, that's just fandom, right? But now if I'm
100%.
wearing apparel that is associated with the Galaxy, now again, I think, yeah, it's very obviously I'm bringing it further into my life, deeper connection, and in a slightly different category. That's interesting.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's a hard one to convince a lot of, well, I guess my bosses, because, CMOs are very focused on a lot of the media and the ticket sales almost, or the campaign execution. But
Mm,
if you can twist, you have to, almost explain the fact that building the brand meeting and that cultural relevance is what's actually most important. And yeah, sure, people can buy the merchandise and that can bring in some money, but without that exposure and awareness in a real world space, and so people's attention is seeing it in a different light,
mm,
that's actually what's helping a brand grow. And they're going to come to games, but you can't necessarily track it from a
mhm.
traditional marketing sense, but it is invaluable. And that's what, you know, I could argue till the day I die about how much we filled the stadium because of this versus having to go out and sell a discounted ticket or a discounted beer or whatever. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you've already identified part of the other challenge is until you get to the true loyalists, the performance of the team is going to influence that aspect of the game.
Mm,
So if I'm just attached to the Galaxy because they're winning, not this last season, but the season before, I'm attached to the Galaxy because they're winning and I like to be associated with a winning team. That's not deep loyalty. That's not a deep connection. But as you're
no,
building this deeper brand connection, oh, I have half my wardrobe is associated with the Galaxy. I love the music.
mine
Yeah, I
is it.
get it. Yeah. Okay. It starts to get much deeper. Um, I want to pivot a little bit as we're coming up towards the tail end. We've talked a lot about your role. We've talked a lot about brand and the influence of brand. I'd like to back up a little bit and talk about you in a leadership role, because none of this has been you by yourself, right? In all of your roles, you're leading a team, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Eh,
Yeah. My team is, they change in different size, and I had a fantastic team at Galaxy, and same with the commanders. And um, so what the question being, like, how it
Yeah,
is working with
I didn't get to the
and
question. So the question now
right.
is, you're leading a team at the Wall Street Journal, and I'm not gonna make a bunch of suppositions. I'm just gonna think them. Now you move to the Commanders, what will become the Commanders. You're still in the same universe of role branding, creative, everything else. But I'm curious to know, from, again, coming back to the filters of attention and someone's ability to follow your lead in that way. Did you have to make adjustments? Did you have to make adjustments based on their capacity? Did you have to make an adjustment based on what they were interested in? How did you mature as a leader, or change as a leader, as you went through these last few stages, or most recent stages of your
Yeah,
career?
it's a great question. Goes to me, it was about curiosity and learning, and you know, um, I'm not insecure, and I hate to not just big myself up at all. But going into these roles is I just wanted to learn from my direct reports, their direct reports, and almost just be inspired by them and understand, like, okay, how do you guys operate? What are your skill sets? And maybe I can read people, but I want to understand, like, what are their passion points in order to be able to find a way to inspire them and work differently. And so I lead with inspiration, and I don't know. I've worked for a lot of leaders in the past who may actually not be very good at their job. Like, they have gotten to a place because of how they've dealt with politics in a better way than I have. And so a lot of mine was the curiosity about the world, and not the world, but the roles I was going into in that space. Learning from the people I was working with, and then inspiring them because I know how to do it as well. Like, I'm
Mm,
not a fake, and I want to show them through sincerity. And when you're working with a new team and trying to shift their mindset to think differently, it is ultimately it's going to be on me, and I'm going to be fired, not them. So that also helps. But um, it actually opens their eyes, because a lot of young generation, a lot of the Gen Z, or people who are working in a lot of these teams or organizations nowadays, their attention span is like, it's so quick. Like, I mean, you and I is probably dwindling because we're just getting older, but because of the technology in the world nowadays, their attention span is also shifting a lot. So when you can inspire them to be able to, give them the opportunity to do what, almost take huge educated risks, and guiding them through that, and even if they're scared, but you're like, no, it doesn't matter. Let's do this together, and we're going to create something that's very different. And I would always use any almost not mistake. It's almost like if something doesn't quite work out, let's use as data. I'm not going to be punish people for it. So I empower my team to make decisions, and I'm going to creatively make sure it's going in the right direction. But I work, and this is a philosophy I'm sure that you stand by as well. But you work with people that you want to end up working for, um, and I believe in that, and I want to be able to. And the best leaders in this world are the ones who have the best people working for them, because you can't do any of this without people. We're all
mhm.
humans. We all have the same feelings. We all go home at night. We all go to sleep. If anyone you're working for, and the same with me working for a boss, if that boss has the respect and trust, and is honest, and gives you the freedom and the skills, like almost helps guide your skill set in order to grow, you are so willing to do, you're going to go the extra 10 miles for that person. Does that make sense? And
Mhm.
I work so hard, and I know you do too. So it's not necessarily me checking in at 10, leaving by 3. I work 24 hours a day. So you're leading by that example. Um, yeah, it's such an America's interesting to me, because as a leader, you become more of a therapist. I think this is, trying to solve, that's your problem solving, is becoming a therapy guidance or guidance counselor, because there's a lot of passion in sports, and people are working on goals.
I wasn't sure where you were
But
going there. So
yeah, and
that's
a lot of passion, a lot of
interesting.
clashing of heads, and people get burnt out. And so you become a sounding board to resolve personal problems between people, and trying to put them back on track, and make sure that mentally they're happy in one lane versus crossing into someone else's. And that's where tension is caused. So It is. Wall Street Journal was less of that, strangely, and actually with the other companies. But sports is there's a lot more emotion and passion going around, and a lot of clashes with different personalities because I think of the long hours and people get burnt out, and so you're having to keep their minds fresh and make sure that they're you're guiding them the right way and not creating conflict where it doesn't need to happen. And so, yeah,
Well,
I hope
so
that
I'm
answers
gonna
it.
jump in here. It doesn't surprise me again from the outside in because I would expect, course correct me here, but I would expect at the journal you have people who are probably coming from, and I'm not trying to generalize or separate, but the business often attracts people who resonate with the brand. So if I'm
Mm,
going to go work at the Wall Street Journal, it's because I have aspirations of either getting to very high levels of journalism or very high levels of sort of culture. Whereas I might go work for a sports team because yeah, I'm still at the same level of intelligence and I still have the same level of drive. But man, I just love sports, right?
yeah,
I just want to be a part of it. And so that's what I was what I was looking for is did you see behavioral differences sort of from the cognitive side at the Wall Street Journal? If you gave an assignment, did everybody just sort of like lock in and get it done versus now you get to the commanders and you give an assignment and it's just a bunch of people
yeah.
talking and they have to solve it through group chat.
It was an interesting spec. I think when at Wall Street Journal, I was again newsroom side, I was on the brand side. You're It was so much brand partnerships and branded content. So you're in a world with a brand partner. So you have it's an understanding in a lane, right? And I would push the innovation as far as we could go with it. But ultimately, even if we did stuff for our own brand, it became easier because you're so used to the branded content side. But when you work for a sports team where you control your own destiny, you could put
Mm,
whatever you want out whenever you need. You're not
mm,
necessarily sort of have a gun to your head because of a company's paying you tons of money and they're a brand partner. So
right.
that shift is very different. You almost like you have a lot more structure and organization, I guess, or discipline working Wall Street Journal side versus a team side where it is all over the place and you're kind of on your own island to do what you want. And I think what I've learned over my career is there's a new type of creative professional or marketing professional is the ones who can sort of toggle between that strategic patience and tactical speed. And speed is everything in
Hmm,
sports because it's
hmm.
and so you're bringing in that data and using it, but you're not enslaved by it. The quality over quantity as well, I think, was something that was a real shift for people in sports. Is Wall Street Journal? It was all about the quality. Everything that went out had to be and I just become so passionate about that. Maybe it's my early career at Wyden Kennedy, but building that as an infrastructure and guiding that as both art and infrastructure effectively is what the teams I had to sort of educate to become, gain their attention with discipline, coherence, and that was part of my remit there. So that was a really interesting shift mentally for a lot of the mindsets within the teams at the Commanders and Galaxy was they were so almost ingrained to just do mass content out every
Hmm.
hour, every hour. And it was
Hmm.
exhausting. I was tired and, you could see they were burning out. And it's like, well, why do you have to do this? You don't. We can do one post a week if we want. And so the freedom scares people versus the Wall Street Journal side when you have a lot more structure, I guess.
Hmm.
I think the breaking people's mindsets that they have freedom and let's enjoy this. We don't have to feel like sports is enjoyable. And that's the fun part
It
about
is.
it. I mean, I don't know. Well, this season for me, the Galaxy was not enjoyable, but, that's, but then it is enjoyable to see. All right, well, look, fuck it, we had a bad see, but
The
it's all that
journey is
roller coaster
enjoyable. Yeah. Right.
learning. There you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Excellent. Um, this very, as I said, this episode we explored some different ground. Hopefully, we've got some people out there who we've captured their attention and got them thinking differently about brand and communication. What if we have people who are early in their careers, they're familiar with you and they're thinking, yeah, look at man, Will, he has had such a
I
awesome
don't think they'll
career,
say
man.
that.
He was chief
I
brand
think
officer at the Galaxy and he was at the Commanders, but I know you like to be in the mentor role. If somebody's early in their career, they want to be in the creative space, they want to be in the marketing space. What recommendations would you give them in regards to the journey and the path? And specifically, is there any tips around how do you keep your thinking right or align correctly to be successful in this space?
Oh, man, it's a great question. I mean, maybe curiosity is the biggest thing as well. I think
Mm,
if you continue to keep your mind as open as I watch everything and consume everything, and that sounds ridiculous, but I will watch the selling sunset shows because my wife loves those. But I watch the anything and read an article that is a B2B article somewhere else. But as long as you're consuming and you're training your mind to be as open minded as possible, so then you're going into anything with such a broader perspective on life and what that can apply to your world is number one. But for young people coming into this world and game is build your craft and your skill set. And I think that's the most important thing is being able to have showing and versus doing versus and talking. I don't know, yeah, creating and showing that you can have an impact versus just talking through it. That's it's difficult. Quality, quantity is always a big thing,
mhm,
and connecting with people as well. Don't be afraid to reach out and have the conversations. And um, again, curiosity has always been my biggest driver in life. Is I'm curious about people. I'm curious about jobs, roles, like everything. So curious about you and what your product is as well. That if you can find a way to continue to your attention is driven through the curiosity. And sure, you may not be curious about everything. That's fine, but keeping that open minded, being curious is what leads you to what you will. It could be a mistake, but by chance lead you to your next role. But reach out. I mean, I'm more likely to also speak to anyone if they want to have more conversations with me about this, and I'd love to help. And I'm
great.
also curious to meet people. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a great way to bring us to the end of this conversation because your commitment to curiosity, your open mindset, right? So one of the behaviors that will also lead to long-term cognitive thriving. And I think it's a little bit more indicative for men to slowly close down than it is for women. You know, when we look at, I think we talked about this off camera, this whole idea of being in the sandwich generation, where we're taking care of our kids if we have kids, and we're also now taking care of our aging parents. What
Mm.
I'm starting to see is for men, man, the world gets smaller faster for some reason,
Yeah.
and they're just they lose that openness, they lose that mindset of challenge, that mindset of being uncomfortable, and we know that that is going to have an impact on your overall cognitive health and by association, your ability to focus and thrive. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think it's important to cultivate that when you're young and to hold on to it as long as you possibly can. I know that I try to challenge myself every year. I try to pick something new to learn that I know I suck at because it not only keeps me in that open perspective, but it also reteaches me what it's like to have beginner's mind and humility and
How do you?
all these
Sorry to
things.
interrupt. How do you keep
Yeah.
your cognitive health positive and great? I'm very curious. Are there like a couple of steps you do? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's really interesting. My career in human performance has been a gift to me because I'm often in leadership roles, sometimes in coaching roles, and I believe very much like yourself that you really need to walk the talk. And so I feel a great deal of responsibility, both to my family, but also to myself professionally. So as I learn about these fundamental principles, I try to apply them. So one of the big changes in the last year was really improving my sleep performance
Mm.
because I knew instinctively for long-term health, it was so important, but also for short-term health. When I don't get enough deep sleep, I'm not as cognitively supple, but also I'm not emotionally available, which is really interesting. So
You're
that was a
you're
big
very
tuning point. Mm,
yeah, because you're very captivating and you're no bullshit, and you have a very just level. I think I don't. You're very level headed, and it's when you speak, I'm like locked in. It's yeah. So yeah, whatever you've done is so impressive because
It, it,
it's really
it's an
captivating.
AI filter that I use when I'm in digital conversations.
So more sleep. Okay, that's number one. Is all right.
So, I mean, for me, it does come back to the fundamentals. I grew up in the fitness industry, and so exercise has always been something very important to me, and I'm recommitted to it in the last few years. I don't miss workouts anymore, even if they're
I was gonna
very
say, do you want to
short.
show us your six pack or no?
No,
We're
not going to happen.
okay.
But a part of it is I go through stages in my life. I'm trying to reset the rules. So there was when I worked at TRX, and it was when TRX was really thriving, and I was in the we had a lot of young people working for us, and then we had people sort of my age. And our goal was always to not only hold up in the workouts, but then kind of show the younger folks how it's done. That kind of pressure gets ridiculous when you enter your 50s. And so learning how to continue to adjust the goalpost. I still train, but I don't train as hard. Recovery is more important than it was
Mm,
when I was younger, but we know that's true overall. I'm commit to the basics. We know from a cognitive perspective, the basics are you've got to have effective sleep. You have to really manage your
yeah.
sleep hygiene. You have to have basic nutritional guidance, and sometimes tuning that a little bit. I eat more protein than I used to, and that's partly for cognitive, it's partly for training. I've been meditating on and off for 35, 40 years. So I check a lot of those boxes. But I think for me, ultimately, it's coming down to showing grace to yourself. Is we live in this
Yeah.
hyper performance culture where you go, let's bring it back to social media. Every time you go on social media, you just feel shitty about yourself.
Mm,
Like,
yeah.
man, I thought I was so fit for somebody in their 50s. I'm nothing. Look at it. It's
Yeah.
terrible. And so for me, I'm finding being more reasonable to myself and realistic to myself, so in all these domains helps me stay centered, helps me stay where
Oh,
I am.
you're inspirational, mate. I definitely don't get enough sleep, and so I think that's really good to hear. So thank you, man. I
Well,
appreciate
I'm
it.
happy to give you some guidance off camera.
All right.
Will, if people want to get a hold of you, you mentioned that. What's the best way? And obviously, I'll put some
Yeah,
of
please
this in the show
do.
notes.
I have a website which I think has my email on, which is just willmisselbrook.com. But LinkedIn is the best place. I'm always on LinkedIn. Uh, just Will Misselbrook, and you should be able to find me there. And I'd love to chat to anyone who wants
Awesome,
to have a conversation.
wonderful. Well, it was a delight having you on the show. Really
Thank you
appreciate you
so
taking the
much.
time.
I
We'll
appreciate you.
chat soon.
Thanks again,
You
mate.
too. All right. Bye bye.